Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we examine important issues either ignored or misrepresented in the mainstream narrative. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel, and on the show this week, it's a great pleasure to welcome back Roslyn Ross. Roslyn is a thinker, a fan of the ideas of Ayn Rand and of Objectivism, and also the author of a few books, her most recent one being Farm Family, City Family, which is a sort of a personal expose of having one foot in each world, you could say, spending part of the year in a farm in Nicaragua and part of the year enjoying city life in Los Angeles. Our discussion quickly went on to some of the ideas of Ayn Rand and whether or not they can endure in the current context of sort of creeping collectivism and the slow collapse of Western civilization. And our discussion sort of centered on this context of collectivism versus individualism, and whether these core ideas of the existence of an objective truth, the idea of reality as an objective absolute, independent of any consciousness, human or divine, and whether or not these ideas can help us or hinder us, whether or not they are pro-survival for our genetic line in this uncertain future, or whether they stand to compromise it and serve to undermine the potential for us to thrive and pass on our genes. We pick up the discussion looking at the huge prevalence of the logical fallacy of the appeal to majority. What I mean by that is that most people believe things that are in the mainstream, in the news, that everyone else believes. This is a very popular logical fallacy, and that's the point where we pick up the discussion anyway. So I do hope you enjoy this chat with Roslyn Ross.
Observing people's psychoepistemology, observing what people do, even really rational people. I know a few people, business owners have said, people work in the law. Even a lawyer chap who was working on evidence. He was actually working on the idea of whether to prosecute because was there enough evidence to make the case clear. So these minds that I'm talking about are fully capable of rational thought, and yet I observe when broaching certain subject areas, challenging subject areas, admittedly. They shut down and they can't follow me. Along the logical argument. That they at some point they just can't go there, and I find this for me personally, and I'm curious to know what your perspective is. I wonder how representative this is of a sort of a blockage humanity has. It's something we've clearly got to evolve beyond. We've clearly got to develop more awareness of the concept of objective truth, but it seems that a lot of people are very stuck with classic logical fallacies in their thinking. Does this color your optimism, pessimism?
Well, I have two thoughts about that. Number one is that remember that people are much better at thinking rationally when they're reading than when they're speaking. So when you're reading or writing thoughts down, you can abstract at a much greater level than you can when you are speaking. So we don't do a lot of reading anymore. That's one thing that you can note. What is the average American doesn't even read a book a year. Yeah. And if they do read, it's like a blog post. That's not real reading. That's not logical reading. So I think there's first to that is that we don't practice logical thinking very much anymore.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was, what is that saying? If not knowing a certain thing you have to not know this in order to earn your bread, or you don't bite the hand that feeds you. No, what is that? There's a saying. I don't remember it, but if
your livelihood depends on you not knowing something, is that
one? Yeah, if my livelihood depends on me not knowing what you're saying, I'm not going to know it. I'm not interested. We're good. And I think that, but also then there's just this other thing that I found in my life that is, most people don't really want to have intellectual conversations.
No.
They're just, it's not fun. Like to me, there's nothing more interesting in the world. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to sit around and I want to talk about, like, I want to really get to the heart of an issue, and then I want to map it out, maybe with a chart, and I want to figure out, all the answers.
Yeah.
This apparently is not what other people think is fun. There are apparently, so there's all these people that want me to go to a party and like dance to music, and okay, like a little bit, but I have learned in my life that for most people, intellectual conversations are just not interesting to them, and so why do it?
Yeah, and that doesn't really bode well for humanity, does it? Because there's so many people out there that think there's a great awakening happening. It's like everyone's just automatically going to go, ding, oh, yes, enlightenment, without any appreciation for the mental, legwork that needs to be done. All these intellectual conversations, all of this reasoning through, all of this nitty gritty thinking stuff that people aren't really that interested in doing. They don't seem to appreciate that I've always advocated is the route to anything that we can call higher consciousness. A greater awareness can only be an intellectual greater awareness, a conceptual greater awareness.
Right.
So again,
if we didn't have computers right now, could we invent them? Like, if we didn't have cars already, could we invent that again?
Yeah, I doubt it.
That's what you have to think about it, because remember that ancient Rome, they had indoor plumbing. And after the fall of Rome, they lost that technology for 1,000 years. It took 1,000 years to get to the point where they could reinvent that technology. So you have to wonder, like,
yeah.
I hope society doesn't fall. Like, I try to be an optimist. Like you said, I want to be an optimist. But yeah, it's
difficult, isn't it? It's difficult these days with if you said that you alluded to this idea that people are not interested in truth, the collectivists don't believe in an objective truth. It's very difficult to know where to start with people in terms of persuading them of anything. If
they don't want to be persuaded. I mean, that's the thing. That's one of the things I loved about Nathaniel Branden is he would say, don't talk about if you encounter resistance, don't talk about whether or not something is. Talk about what if. Like, don't let's not have an argument about what I think is and what you think is. Let's have an argument about what if this is true. That's a lot less threatening than
yes, that's a very good point. Very good point.
Yeah, I like that. I use that one, but at the same time it doesn't matter, because if you say to someone, what if this is, let's have an intellectual conversation, and they're like, or we could watch football.
Ah!
Great, let it go.
Yeah.
And that's where monarchists come back, and
yeah,
and you start to question whether or not everyone should have the vote, because most of the people don't even care. So why are they voting?
That's true. But it's interesting. I mean, I come back to some of these relationships I have around me with intellectually capable minds who certainly on the surface like to have an intellectual conversation, and yet here's a classic example. I have one chap, a friend of mine, is actually a namesake. He's also called Nigel. He likes to engage in a rational conversation, but for example, we'll be talking about various medical issues to do with the current global situation, and again, we come up against this sort of roadblock, and I just find it so fascinating, and at the same time sort of disturbing in a sense. I'm slightly repeating the point I made earlier, but slightly disturbing in that seems to be so widely representative of people who are intellectually capable, who would actually choose to have a conversation instead of go and watch the football, and still they are not prepared, and he's not. Well, I say he's not a collectivist. He's not overtly a collectivist, but yeah, still there's this sort of resistance.
Well, and you can also just ask. You can just be like, hey, I noticed that you don't really want to have this conversation, and that's interesting to me. So what? Tell me more about. Let's not even have the conversation. Let's just talk about your resistance to the conversation, because I'm dying to know, like, why do you hate this conversation? And then maybe you can get to the blocks, the whole like, man, I just don't want to fight. Because I remember my grandfather was one of those people, like clearly bright, uninterested in having any sort of conversation that beyond football. And to his granddaughter, who had literally zero desire to talk about football. And I finally asked him, I was like, why, how come you don't want to have any interesting conversations? And he was like, because I don't want to fight with anyone. I just want everyone to get along. And I was like, okay, I can see that. It's more, you don't care. Intellectual truth doesn't matter to you more than everyone just sitting around smiling and, pretending that we're all happy and having a good time. And I get that, and I can respect that, and we can move on.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Since you don't want to do any thinking, can I vote for you? Since I'll do the thinking. You don't want to, I'll take 2 votes.
Mm. And it's interesting because Craig Biddle of the Objectivist, was it OSI? I think his organisation. He does such a good job at presenting the idea that for humans to flourish, we need to be free, and it's provable. It's rationally provable. You can demonstrate this, and he does a good job of doing so. And that really doesn't bode well, does it?
I can't get past that statement. I can't agree with that statement at all. So, for humans to flourish, they have to be free.
Absolutely.
Anyone with Q below 90 isn't capable of freedom. They won't even allow it to happen.
Well, yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, I can see that a lot of people don't want to be free. I mean, this idea that everyone wants to be free is a nonsense.
Yes.
Only very, very rare individuals do want to be free. But I would still say that to have a fully human life and to thrive, we need to be able to act on our own judgment. We need to have no political impairment.
You're looking at the world from an individualist, Western, objectivist paradigm. And, that's a really rare, tiny percentage of the population paradigm. Most people are looking at the world from I want to win. I want my people to win. I want your people to die, and I want my people to win. Or I want your people to be slaves to my people, and I want my people to win. Or I want you to be poor, and I want to be rich and conquer you. Most, or at least collectivists, and maybe I shouldn't say most people in the world. Maybe I should say, but this whole idea that humans need to be free, they need to flourish. No, they don't. You invented that idea. Mother Nature didn't invent that idea. Mother Nature said, whoever is the most powerful and can control the most people, you win. That's what Mother Nature said.
Well, there's evidence that contradicts that, though, because the birth of the United States in the 1800s and the massive period of flourishment and economic boom that lifted everyone's standard of living across the globe was a direct result of men being able to act on their judgment, i.e.
But that's you being rational again.
Yeah, let's be rational for a moment in order to identify the evidence that shows that when men, the species, are free to act on their own judgment, unencumbered, great things happen.
Okay, how about this? I'm a hunter-gatherer. There's a fabulous book on this called Hierarchy in the Forest. I'm a hunter-gatherer, and I notice that you are a better hunter than I am. And our tribe will flourish if we all support you so that you can hunt and kill more animals. But you know what will also happen? You'll become more powerful than I will. So I don't really care about our tribe. I care about me and my access to women. So I'm going to kill you. I'm going to get 4 other guys together, and we're going to kill you because you're so great and because you would provide flourishing to our tribe, because you would end up with more money or more women or whatever it is. Hunter-gatherers have the highest murder rate of any people in the world. They have a 10% murder rate. Mm-hmm. And they, by and large, kill anyone who's excellent because they believe in equality. They believe so fervently that we should be equal, that if you show in any way that you are above me, you have to go, because you will, by no fault of your own, just by being better at things than other people, you will create inequality in our society. So you are bad and you have to go. Now, in your argument, shouldn't we all love human flourishing? No. You think because you are excellent and you will rise up the whole world. You'll make them all better. You think they should appreciate you and love the human flourishing that you're going to provide. But me, as the guy with the 70 IQ, you're just going to take the best girls. I don't appreciate that flourishing. I will flourish in a world where we beat each other to death and have lots of violence and chaos. That's where I will flourish. So no, thank you. I'm gonna kill you. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. That's a very anti-evolutionary component.
Well, this is what hunter-gatherers.
Is it to human nature? I don't know whether that's the right to pin that on human nature, to human behavior. That's a very negative feedback.
Oh, it's horrifying. Yes, it's horrifying, but you have to understand that was humans a lot longer than ancient Greece was humans.
Sure.
And also, that's when you argue what is the natural state of humanity, I don't know what that's why I studied hunter-gatherers for so long, because I was trying to what is the natural state of humanity, and it's terrifying. It is really, really scary, and that's why they did so poorly against farmers and people who believed in meritocracy, because for a really long time equality was more important to them than thriving, which you see in the United States today. They're getting rid of all the gifted programs because that creates inequality.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't want inequality now, would we?
Well, again, it seems another nail in the coffin for Western culture, doesn't it? I mean, it's very difficult to maintain that optimism that we want so desperately to maintain in the light of so this sort of feeds in with you hinted in an email exchange, I think, that you're disillusioned with objectivism, with some of the ideas of Ayn Rand. I'm sort of smelling that some of these thoughts that you're coming out with, which do seem to sort of challenge that. Can you sort of sort of summarize where where your thinking has changed?
My first issues with objectivism were the following. So first, I'm like, all right, so something about it doesn't work, because objectivists have been around for a long time now, 70 years. So at minimum, that's if you didn't follow her at the beginning of her career. That's if you just started with, Atlas Shrugged. We've been around for a while, and maybe it's 6 years, whatever. So we've been around at least 2 generations, maybe 3, depending on your birth rate. Objectivists have been trying to live together. They've been trying to create communities for a long time now. None of them have worked. And yet 80 random dudes who believed in the same, God in the 1700s could go start a new life in a new country in the wilderness under the harshest conditions ever and make it work and create a successful world. The Hutterites, 80 guys just being kicked out of one place and move into Russia and freezing and farming and believing in their little book. The Hasidic Jews, they can be transplanted all over the world and make it work. But objectivists, with their objective truth, they can't establish a community and make it work. That's interesting, right? So that was my first, something doesn't work.
But I must. Can I interject quickly before you go? Don't lose your next point. But just to mention, I see mainstream objectivism, ARI, Atlas Society. I don't see them practicing the ideas of Ayn Rand. I spoke with Dr. David Kelly about his brilliant book, The Art of Reasoning. What a brilliant piece of work. There's a man that's really ripped down the art of thinking, reasoning, amazing. And yet I know many truths that he's utterly oblivious of. I was gobsmacked at how in the matrix, I would say, he is. Now, I have a huge respect for David Kelly. Please misunderstand me. But my point is that to mention a few controversial ideas and immediately have this flag conspiracy theorist come up is a massive roadblock to any rational thinking. And indeed, it's even rational. People talk about I'm loath to even say it, lest a video be taken down from mentioning the word, but it rhymes with Maxine. It rhymes with the girl's name Maxine.
Oh,
on that debate, it would be rational I think, to explore all of the ideas for that idea, that treatment, and all of the ones against it. You have to go to the naysayers rationally and hear their argument. Why wouldn't you do that? What's wrong with this? You have to gather all that information as any detective would. And this is what amazes me about, these mainstream objectivists. They utterly don't do that. So to come back to your point, we've had 70 years of objectivism. Have we, I say? I don't think we have. We've had 70 years of some ideas being selectively practiced and championed, and a great big hoo-ha and an annual parade about some of these ideas, but they're not really applying them. They're not being objectivists. They're not finding out the truth. And worse, they seem disinterested to.
Well, then you should point to the essay that Ayn Rand wrote in her book about what is it, the new intellectual, what is it? Ooh, where's that? Let's see. Return of the Primitive. In the Return of the Primitive, she has an essay about how there's no science happening in the United States anymore. How the minute the government gets involved with scientists, there's no actual science happening. It's just various people's agendas, and that. So, I mean, that's the objectivists that I meet who are super into science because they think that to be an objectivist means to buy into science. They're not paying attention. Science that isn't done on the free market isn't science. No. So I don't know that it shouldn't even be. You shouldn't be arguing about the science of vaccines. You should be arguing about, well, is there science being done today? Is that science? Is it science when one big business gets money from the government, puts money in somebody's pocket, and pays people to put out their propaganda? Is that what science is?
Yeah.
So that's that.
Okay. So let's come back to the point you were going to say about after 70 years of objectivism.
Oh. Okay. So my first thought was that, right? My second thought was the parenting ideas that I had espoused, reading all of Nathaniel Branden, reading all of the parenting books that he suggested. I realized, a whole bunch of people already raised their kids this way. I'm not a pioneer here. Nathaniel Branden was really popular. Atlas Shrugged was like the #1 New York Times seller for years. And Nathaniel Branden was a celebrity. I mean, I'm not a pioneer. I can look at the results that have already happened by people who already raised their kids this way. And when I look at it, I see tragedy. And so I say, wait a minute, something doesn't work. So here's the next thing. Then you read Richard Dawkins' books, The Selfish Gene, and you read about genes and memes. And you're like, okay, so any religion, whatever, it's a meme. Objectivism is a meme. Does the meme of objectivism support your genes? And the answer is no. Actually, objectivism will obliterate your genes because it doesn't care about you biologically. Objectivism, so that was always another problem with objectivism, is it didn't support parents. And that's what I wanted to do, is I wanted to come in and explain how objectivism could support parents and families and children. But at the end of the day, it doesn't. Most objectivists don't have kids. They're not breeding. They're living their selfish lives. And if they do breed, they want their kids to go do their selfish thing, and they're going to do their selfish thing. They don't create a family. They're not, because that would be collectivist, and you don't want to do that. So there was something that is, so objectivism is so important and so amazing. And yet at the same time, biologically speaking and community building speaking, and free, the Christians are crushing you. So if we're at a game, like a baseball game or whatever, between the objectivists and the Christians, like the objectivists are dead within 2 generations and the Christians rule the world. And why is that? That's fascinating, right? There's this book, this random book. It's like 2,000 years old. It's full of total lies. It's ridiculous. It's got all these weird ideas. And yet people who read that book can create families and communities and countries that work and thrive and have birth rates. The West doesn't have a birth rate. We're a dying society, a dying way of life. And so so the interesting thing is, individualists, they're not motivated to have children because they're on a journey of self-realization and joy seeking. And children they really interfere with that. Collectivists are motivated to have children because they're fighting a war, and every child is another soldier in their war. So it's really, so the balance, so in our society, so what I see objectivism as is the ultimate in individualism, right? The West is already pretty individualist, but it's got some collectivistic tendencies. But if you're like me and you want to take things to the very end, you want to take the abstract principles to the very, very tippy top and start from there, then you end up with objectivism. And that's the final level of individualism, right? It doesn't work. Something about it doesn't work. It's a meme. It's a deadly meme that if you take on, will most likely end your genetic line. Unlike were I to adopt Mormonism or become a Hutterite or an Amish person, my genetic line would expand. And the genes that I have in me that love objectivism and love truth and individualism, they would propagate the earth. Unlike objectivism, where I'm just this individual person with no group who says my ideas and doesn't understand why people don't want to join. So there's an element of why would anyone want to be an objectivist? Like at a very deep level, they can see that something about it isn't successful and something about it is potentially deadly.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's where I'm at.
Well, that's really interesting. I'm not convinced. I mean, I hesitate to use the word objectivism and call myself an objectivist anyway. I prefer to think of the ideas of Ayn Rand, an objective reality, objective truth, looking for fundamentals.
I like those things.
Acting in accordance with the facts of reality, right? That is a winner, okay? It doesn't matter whether we call ourselves collectivists, individualists. Anyone who wants to survive needs to act on the facts of reality. That's an enduring idea that promotes success. I would say, she even explored the idea of living a fully human life. And when we start to use our conceptual faculty, I learned from Ayn Rand, these aren't my original thoughts, as you know, obviously, when we start to use our conceptual faculty, our uniquely human attribute that defines us, when we use that more and more, like you like to have an intellectual discussion, like I do, we don't want to sit around watching football. It's more fun when you get the intellectual legs, when you gain self-confidence that you can conceptualize and you're up and running, as it were. I would obviously you can't have this debate with football watchers because we're not on a level playing field, but I would say that is being fully human, and that is where this living a fully human life, all this sort of stuff, it's along with all the sort of fridge, freezers and washing machines that come along with the recognition of an objective reality. These ideas are enduring, and I'm not sure I quite get, apart from I'm not sure I quite get how you think that those ideas, maybe we're talking about a slightly different set of ideas there, have as you've described it, they're fundamentally anti-evolutionary. They haven't got the evolutionary advantage, basically. Whereas I have been of the mind until this discussion, and I'm happy to have my mind changed, I hasten to add, that you're going to have an evolutionary advantage if you're acting on the facts of reality. So if you reason, if you can conceptualize more, if you can think more than other people, that is an evolutionary advantage, I would say. What do you think about that?
Only it depends on your group. If you can conceptualize more and you're a very smart hunter-gatherer, it will get you killed. That is not an advantage. If you live in a society in which your intellect is appreciated and supported by your society, and you are encouraged to use that intellect, then it is an advantage. In fact, if you live in a meritocratic society, maybe you'll even be rewarded for it. But if you live in a different type of society, you might get killed for it. So it really just depends on your group.
Right. So therefore, you could say, extending from what you're saying, that reason sort of feeds off itself. Reason flourishes in a culture of reason, but it goes down the pan.
We are big fans of reason because that's what you like, and that's what I like. But like I said, there's a whole bunch of
but the only reason I like it, Roslyn, and I'm sure the same with you, is that it works. I don't like reason like I like strawberry ice cream because I choose to like strawberry ice cream. I like it because it works. Just to be clear on that point, is that not why you like it?
I think I like it intrinsically. It's just part of who I am. So yeah, I just can't get over, like, I like reason, but I get it that a guy with an IQ of 70 doesn't. And that he's really not into it and not into this. What does he call me? I'm a word wizard or whatever. He's not really into what I'm doing with these fancy words, and he doesn't really care. It doesn't benefit him, and he can't conceptualize how it could benefit him, except that, oh great, so we all have more stuff, but you have the money, and I am the poor guy doing the gardening. Like, I'm gonna kill you, because in a society without reason, I have status and power, and in a society of brute force, I win. The reasonable guys, they don't win in a violent society of brute force. They are the peasants. They go hide and farm, and they're like, no, just leave me alone. I don't want to fight. Like, I'll just farm. I'll pay you taxes. Just leave me alone. It's the other guy that doesn't have the reason. He's the guy that wins in the chaos. So I'm sorry, I think I'm repeating myself.
Yeah. No. So do you see any possibility for reason to grow then in a particular culture? And I use that sort of term almost hinting at its sort of biological, in our Western culture as we see it at the moment, and in the whole environment for something to grow. Is the environment that we have, the cultural environment, appropriate to any kind of growth in objectivity, reasoned argument, recognition of objective truth? I'm getting that you're painting a picture that it's not. Do you think there are?
So I think the pendulum swings back and forth. I think that after after your society disintegrates into gang warfare, when you're the reasonable guy offering people peace and meritocracy, that becomes a lot more attractive when they're experiencing the alternative. I think Western people haven't lived. I mean, Western people should all go live in a third world country for a year or two, and then they will really appreciate the police, right? They will really appreciate law and order if they go live somewhere that doesn't have it, which is what happened to me. I was an anarchist who went to Nicaragua and was like, yes, freedom. And then I was like, wow, I really like law and order a lot. So there's that,
But what about when the state gets hold of law and order, which is where we're at the moment? The state...
Yeah, it can be
as a vehicle, as an institution that lends itself well to being hijacked.
Oh yeah, it's being racist is legal. All these horrific things are legal. It's really interesting. What is it? Lee Kuan Yew says in his books. Democracy will always head towards corruption. That's what Aristotle says too. It will always lead back to chaos and then monarchy, because in a democratic system, you give the vote to everyone, and 50% of the population is always going to vote for the free stuff. And in order to give away free stuff, you got to take stuff. So in a democratic system, you're always going to devolve into socialism because you gave the vote to everyone. And 50% of the population, they just want the free stuff. So that's why Aristotle was like, it's a system, and it goes around. And right now, you're just trying to. We all know that the West is falling. The question is, how long will it take? The fall of Rome. It took 400 years ish. Where are we in the fall of the U.S.? Where are we in the fall of the West? Where is it headed? How soon do we want to run off to a farm? When I have a real advantage in this game, a different perspective in this game, because my parents thought society was crumbling. So they ran off to a farm with their kids. So I grew up there, raised in absolute poverty by hippies with teepees who renounced money. And I can look at that and be like, wow, that was a terrible decision that they made. the society wasn't falling all the way yet, I would have been better off being part of it. So I'm really wary about leaving too soon, and getting my blue collar job. There's a lot of people that are like, let's just learn we need to learn, I'm an intellectual, so I don't have blue collar skills outside of like cooking and cleaning, though I am a really good cook, but that's not building a house, that's not plumbing. So at what point do you stop writing books, because those aren't going to be around much longer, and you go learn how to do something useful like farm?
Very interesting. Yeah, interesting points you raised there, Roslyn. Thank you. I like what you say about it's a pendulum that swings, and this is something I was thinking about recently. When looking at how reason has sort of, as you said, it's not been around that long, and it's sort of come and it's gone, and then it went for about 1,000 years, and it came back, and then it ebbed, and then it came back again, and now it's been ebbing for a couple of hundred years, and you asked the question there, you posed the question, how long will it take for the West to fall?
And how far will it fall?
And how far, yeah, absolutely. And we don't know that, do we? We don't know. I mean, it comes down to that question, how much suffering do you need? And perhaps as it falls and people suffer more, they might be more prodded to change things. But I'm most interested in how long will it take when it's fallen, for any sort of build up.
How much crime is necessary before people realize they don't like crime? Because in California, we keep voting, we make crime less and less crime. We're like, oh yeah, you can steal $1,000 and it's not a crime. So now, it's like, how much crime do you want? Like, how much crime before we decide to vote differently?
Yeah. Gosh, so who knows? We obviously we don't have a crystal ball, so we can't see how long the crumbling will take or how long it'll take to come out the other side.
No, and then being a parent, it makes it so hard. You don't know how to raise your kid. Like, I don't know whether, because my kids are super intellectual, right? And I don't know whether I should be like, all right, that's not useful. Well, you need to go to trade school, or law school or trade school, right? Like, I don't.
This is the great conundrum, isn't it, in educating children? What are we educating them for? And we have to pitch 10, 15 years ahead and try and imagine. I mean, obviously most parents don't even do that, but those are ones that are thinking, are trying to imagine what sort of world is going to be there, what sort of opportunities are going to be there. And I find myself in this same conundrum with how we raise our 3 children. It's difficult to know what to prepare them for. And with all the nonsense going on of compulsory medical treatments and wearing of these face devices and all this sort of utter nonsense, I struggle to see some sort of cultural environment where they can go out and have parties and dance with people, meet people of the opposite sex, and getting jobs and things without getting a forced treatment. It's really difficult to see that future at the moment, isn't it? And how best to plan of all the parenting challenges. It's a pretty tricky one for us these days, isn't it?
It's a really hard time to be a parent, and especially, I was going to say, did you know that like the current preschoolers, they have all these speech problems, because to learn to speak, you have to look at other people's lips. Like, that's how you learn how to form words, not just by listening. And so you have this whole, like, it's not a generation yet, but you have a whole bunch of kids that are like years behind in their speaking because they don't.
That's a major catastrophe in the unfolding in front of us, isn't it? Gosh. Well, I mean, I don't want to get too depressive and pessimistic, but thank you so much for some of your ideas, Roslyn. I like the fact that you say that human beings are amazing. They are, and they have a certain unpredictability to them, don't they? Humans always, there's something random can always come out of nowhere, and I quite like that. Not just random and arbitrary, but random and wonderful, and appropriate. So I do hold a degree of optimism as we go into this uncertain future, but I do struggle with it sometimes. And as you said, it's a question of trying to anticipate what's going to happen next and at what pace to judge our next, rational moves. So that said, if we bring that right back to city family,
farm family.
Do you think there's a better place? Do you think that, notwithstanding the fact that your farm scenario is in Nicaragua, suppose it was just outside LA in the country or something. Do you think that the rural may offer some slightly better advantages over the urban, given the sort of future and the uncertainty that we're likely to face?
So I think right now, this and here's the thing. This is an idea I'm trying on. I'm not certain at all. But what I'm leaning towards is that you have to join a collective. Is that the best thing I can do for my children in this time period? Is because here's the thing. I've got a friend with a compound in a rural area. He's a very wealthy guy, and he built his shelter, and he has his 600 cows. And he's got a wife and a kid, and he has no people. And, that's great that he built his compound for the gang that's going to come take it from him. But, a compound isn't nearly as useful as 12 men. And 12 men with guns who know how to use them and know how to work as a team. So I would say, extremely contrary, I'm a hardcore individualist. I don't really like hanging out that much, that's not my thing. I like to sit around and read and then write books, but I think that groups are really going to be key as the world becomes more collectivist for the next century or two or three. I don't really know how long. Us little individualists are going to have to find collectives to join. You're going to need 12 strong men to if you want to. In Nicaragua, one of the first things you learn there is that if you can't protect it, you don't own it. Your farm, you don't get to leave it for a minute, because if your farm is left alone, your neighbors will come take your stuff. And so 12 strong men, because that's what the world is headed towards. I love the experience I've had in Nicaragua, because I have all this wisdom, all this third world wisdom that the West is going to need pretty soon. And I'm really glad that I have that.
And thank you for sharing some of it with us here today.
Oh, here's another. The two best things I learned in Nicaragua. Number one, if you can't protect it, you don't own it, which a lot of people in the West don't realize. They're not used to protecting their stuff. And nobody feels bad about taking your stuff if you didn't protect it. That's the second rule. If you get robbed, you're the idiot. They don't feel like in our culture, if you rob, you are a bad person. And if I don't rob, I am a good person. That is not how, that's not how other people in the world see it. Other people in the world, if you were stupid enough to, walk alone at night down that street and get yourself robbed, you deserve it, and we're all going to laugh at you. So I'm really bad at collectivism. It's not natural to me. And however, I do think that the best thing for your children, it doesn't matter if they're in the city or the country. What matters is that they have 12 men with guns who know how to use them and work as a team.
Mm. Well,
that's a dark thing to say. I'm so sorry.
Let's remember we're thinking in principles. But I think it's very important to be realistic when we climb up into the crow's nest and look ahead and see what's coming and report back. We have to be realistic, and if we're going to if we know that our culture is heading in a particular way, and we can see a way of adapting to that for survival and for our advantage, and particularly our children, then it's very necessary for us to do that. And sometimes it's very unpopular, isn't it, to sort of look ahead and sort of call bad news, the sort of, oh, look, iceberg ahead. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to carry on with gin and tonics. But we do really have to be honest with ourselves. So thank you very much for sharing
Oh,
some of
here's
these
another thing.
insights about third world, because there are people now, I know people who are seriously thinking about leaving a socialist nation that's descending into tyranny before, you know, we're lined up against the wall and we have to meet somebody called Maxine.
No, I was going to say the same rule with Maxine applies for when I talk about Nicaragua. It occurred to me, and you can cut this part out if you want, but I should have been using a code word because I could get banned from the country for some of the things that I've said. And luckily I'm small enough that I probably won't be, but definitely don't tag the place. Don't tag that place in this video. And if you want to bleep those words, I don't know. I should never have said them, but because I know people who have been banned from the country for saying anything negative about it. So they want to flee our socialist hell for a real socialist hell. It's fantastic. However, as a foreigner, you get so much leeway. So, you know, when you're not a member of the country, there's a lot of benefits to being the foreigner. The other thing I was going to say in terms of raising kids is that I like to tell my son, what is it? It's strong men make good times make weak men make hard times make strong men. And so I tell him, you live in hard times, but the good thing about that is that you're going to be a strong man. And and that's a way to put a positive spin on it. I wanted to share that just because it's been so dark. But
thank you very much for that. Well, look, I'm aware that I've taken probably far too much of your time, Roslyn, but thank you so much for sharing your ideas around your book, City Family, Farm Family, and also for sharing a lot of your ideas, your philosophical ideas, because it's very interesting coming from, you know, a rational intellectual perspective and hearing your critique of some of these ideas, or not necessarily some of these ideas, but placing them in the context of the current world that we're in, and having an honest appraisal of, you know, which of these ideas is going to fly and which isn't, and that's very, very useful. So thank you for sharing all of that. Did you want to say anything else by way of closing?
I don't think so. This was really fun. Thank you for having me. That was fun.
No worries. Did you want to just share some contact details, or talk about your other writings and where people might get those?
There's my book. It's so fun for me to see it. I didn't hire someone to do a cover for my other two, so the covers are like not professional looking at all. So it's really fun for me to have an actual book with an actual professional cover. So no, I guess the last thing I want to say about my book that I haven't said is that it is not for everyone, for sure. I'm really curious to know what people think of it. I'm super curious because the people who have read it, I had like 8 people who really liked it, and I had 2 people that were like, I couldn't get past the first chapter. It's so boring. I wanted to die. And so I'm really curious to see how it goes. It's really hard to write a book where you share your own life. I realized that. Writing a book where you share your intellectual ideas, that is so easy. We can all argue about it. It's fine. And then we'll reach a conclusion. And I could be wrong and I can be right. And like, there's no problem here. But when you write a book about your life, it's like really intense. So, so I hope that people like it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts and ideas, Roslyn. Really appreciate it. Maybe we can chat again in the future about some other important issues. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you here today. So, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And do check out the website, lawfulrebel.com, and join me again, another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.